I'm Erica.
And I'm CJ.
And you're listening to the Her Podcast.
You guys, today we're absolutely thrilled to have Ashley Breland back in the studio to talk with us about all things boundaries, specifically leading up to the holiday season. Ashley is the owner of Breland Counseling here in Saskatoon and shares a ton of amazing insights, tools, and support via her own Instagram account, Breland The Boundary Therapist, and on her business account, Breland Counseling. We've had the pleasure of sitting down with Ashley back on episode number 35. So if you guys have not listened to that episode, please go back and listen to it. It is a fan favorite. Today, though, we get to talk to Ashley about boundaries and the holidays, people pleasing, how to identify what your values are, how to set boundaries, what loud and quiet boundaries look like. You guys, this episode is going to be a favorite again, I'm sure. So take out your notepad, send to your friends, and enjoy. Well, I'm real excited to sit down with you today. Mm-hmm. Obviously, your episode is a fan favorite, I think, amongst our
that is exciting to
audience. Yes, absolutely. Very highly listened to. People love it. I think because it's something, and you know, because you have a whole career in counseling and boundaries and all of these things, that it's something that a lot of people struggle with, right? And have, are working through finding their balance and what boundaries means to them and all of these types of things. So if you haven't listened to our original episode, then you definitely need to go listen to that. I think it's episode number 35. We'll link it in the show notes. But today, our hope, I'm sure we'll go all over the place, but our hope today is that we can talk a little bit about boundaries and the holidays.
Dun, dun, dun. Yes. Cue music.
I should have put a tree up.
That would have been
a little
so
cute festive thing.
Like a white one, and then like the pink would have or a pink one like you put in town.
I know.
Yeah, would have been so nice.
We are focused, I promise. No,
Good morning.
I'm very excited for this conversation because the holidays for me, I love the holidays. I love them so much. They bring me so much joy. I had a great childhood with holidays. My mom was always like decorating everything really, really cute. But I remember when we got married and had a baby, it really, really changed things. Yeah. And I remember there was this one Christmas where we were out at an event, home. We would like drop off all the gifts, go to bed, get up. Yeah. And it was actually awful. And Nick and I always sit down and we try to be like, okay, how are we going to approach the holidays? It's like a game plan. And so I'm very interested to hear from you if you'd be open to share how you approach the holidays.
Yeah, I think the holidays brings up different elements of our relationships and connections. And so for us, we have family that is spread out quite a bit. And so when my husband and I first started dating years and years and years ago, we just decided that part of where we were at is that for us, a boundary was spending time with our parents. My husband lost his dad years and years ago. And so that really structured some interesting conversations in our home. And so we've actually never spent Christmas Day in our house ever. Oh. And that's been something for us that we talked about that feels really good for us. Again, not for everybody, but because of the values that we have chatted about and formulated. And now with, I have a stepdaughter, and so my husband's daughter. And then when we had our son 5 years ago, it just reinforced that on Christmas, we're going to spend it with our parents until we can't. And so some years it's with my parents, which is not far from here. And for other years, it's going to be with my husband's mom. And so that's sort of been the conversations that we've had. And yeah, we've never spent a Christmas at our house. Our life takes us everywhere, which is great. But I think it was part of our conversations around our values. Like, what did we value in terms of this time? And did we know that we were talking about boundaries or like values as I'm talking therapy speak in here? No, it was just a natural conversation. It was like, what was important to us? What do we want to do? And both of us really, thank goodness, knew that spending time with our parents was really important.
Well, and I think that's like a key point that you're making, because I think number one, everybody's values are different, right? And I think so often we look at something and we're like, you never home, like, and maybe that doesn't align with my value system. So I'm like, do I need to never be home, or like vice versa, right? And so we compare, which is number one, probably shouldn't do. And number two, I would love to hear how you even just like how you set up that conversation or suggestions, you know what I mean? Of like how to sit down with your partner and identify your true values. Like, do you recommend even doing it a little bit solo and then like coming together, you know, and having updated conversations when things change, like checking in before the holidays and being like, hey, we thought this went well last year. Is that still going to be good for us this year? You know, like what is some of your thoughts around that stuff?
Well, I think anytime that we can invite a conversation in, we're actually connecting with our like co-creator. So sometimes that co-creator is ourself. If we don't have a partner that we have, that co-creator is ourself. And so we hopefully can invite some time and space to think about that. And it can be done solo. It can be done with a trusted confidant. It can be done with a professional. But if you have somebody that I always like to refer to as like a co-creator of this, communication is key. Having that time, that cultivated time in to talk about what we want. What is the intention of this holiday season? What is important to us? For our family, it's being with our parents. And for other families, it's actually having that coveted time at home in the morning on Christmas morning. We don't get to that unless we can actually have a conversation, because if we don't, then those silent expectations that we bring in from our own stories, from the way maybe holidays were structured in my house versus holidays structured in my husband's house, those silent expectations can come in and they can wreak a bit of havoc if we don't actually call them out, right? Because oftentimes we think we expect ourselves and other people, and those silent expectations can take over.
So what are some common silent expectations that you hear?
That every year up until now, I've spent Christmas with my family and this is the way it's going to be. Or I've never spent Christmas with my family and this is the way it's going to be, which is fine. But if life has taken you into a different route, as Erica was saying, when you have kids, it can completely change things, or it can solidify things that were already there. The only way to actually get there is to have a conversation, is to invite communication in and talk about, what do we want this to look like? So this is all boundary work, right? This is what I'm talking about in like therapy speak. Like this is human speak. I'm just talking about it in boundaries, but this is all what this is. And really just understanding the intention. What do we want it to look like? What worked last year? What really didn't work last year? What were those feelings? What do we remember embodying in terms of those feelings that we want to bring forward? And it doesn't have to be like this transactional conversation. It can be a very organic conversation, but I think it's important for any structure of relationship.
So I'm interested in, let's do the opposite. So you're speaking from a place of, we decided to spend Christmas with our parents, which I'm going to blanket statement. I feel like most grandparents would be like pretty excited about. Like, I don't feel like there'd be many that'd be like, no, you can't come here.
Right.
But what about the opposite? What about the opposite conversation? Because it's even funny in my instance. So I come from a big family. I have 3 older siblings. There's like 12 grandkids, like big situation. And I felt really blessed that it was actually my parents who kind of freed us from the expectation of being at their home on Christmas morning.
Yep.
And they actually said, we will no longer like be hosting. If you guys want to come in the afternoon and go skating on the rink, great. But like no longer will we put this expectation. And I was like, thank you, because I was never going to know how to make that move away. So a roundabout way of saying, how do you suggest someone like starts the conversation possibly with their parent or with that upper level person who they have to be like, hey, we're about to change things. Like, what does that look like?
Well, and I think it's important in all of this that remember that people have the right to their own reactions, right? So people are, I don't think we talk about that enough. This has actually been something that's been in my therapy space quite a bit when people are coming and talking about boundaries, is also reminding folks that like people can have reactions. It's really okay. Do we need to take that on? No, but they can have those reactions. So like setting yourself up that, hey, they're going to have some reactions. It's likely coming from a good place.
Right. Like if
the
they're
intention,
mad, it's probably because they want you there.
They want you there. But it's the impact oftentimes that creates some of that divide, that can create some of that divisiveness in a family. And so whoever you are creating this with, either yourself or a partner or a series of individuals, making sure that we all understand, like, we're all humans. We're all going to have these reactions and it's okay. But part of, I think, coming from that in a really compassionate, and anytime I talk about boundaries, it's like, it doesn't have to be cold and be like, we're not coming anymore. It can be led with compassion and love. you know what, things have always been this way. But what we're actually going to do this year, because we've actually had some different conversations, is that Christmas morning, we're actually going to stay at our house. What? You're going to stay at your house? We've never done that. I hear that you're really frustrated, and it makes sense that maybe you don't really understand. But from the conversations we've had in our home, we're going to stay here at Christmas.
Okay, so what I'm thinking about, I'm going to go selfish here a little bit, which, I mean, I feel like we should have just booked this as a therapy session. Here we go. No, so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, so we've talked about this co-creating, and maybe we need to go back to that for a second. Like when you co-create something and you were like, not transactional. Like I know and I'm totally fine to put myself on blast here. I know my go-to is to be like, I want to do this and I want to like really pare it down. Like I don't want to go to everything. And then, you know, my parents have freed us from coming on Christmas morning, and all of a sudden my siblings are all in the group chat being like, hey, who wants to go sledding at mom and dad's? And all of a sudden this decision that my husband and I co-created, I'm now experiencing FOMO. And I'm wondering if you can speak to, and maybe you're like, we need to do this off air, but is almost like, what happens in those instances when you've co-created something, but all of a sudden one of the other people wants to kind of pull away? I should have Nick in here so you can give him advice on, but you know, like, how do you stand and be like, hey, we decided this, like, this is the choice we made for our life this year?
I think, you know, what that actually gets me curious of is maybe the need to defend or justify in that way. That actually tells me more about where you're at with your decision than anybody else.
Right.
Hello, the counselor.
Tell
right?
me
like
more.
No,
it's
I
like,
love it.
Right. When we have a need to, I think sometimes when FOMO comes in, it actually is just, I don't use the word triggering. So I'm going to say sort of pricks us a little bit, like almost like pokes us, like spikes us up a bit.
That's a great word.
And I think what it's telling us is like, okay, where are we at with this? And is there anything left like that's loose that I need to maybe think about? Did I come at this alongside anger? Did I come at this I'm not saying that this is what happened. I'm just, you know, generally,
You're good.
you know, am I coming alongside this with anger or resentment or some frustrations? You know, really examining some of that can maybe pull us back and be like, okay, do I need to make a change? What do I need to do here? Also, I think it brings a good example of like, and both. Like I can have this boundary that, you know, Christmas morning is going to be with us, and I can feel like I'm missing out with some of my siblings. Like, and in both are really, really interesting ways, I think, to give some comfort back to yourself when you have to, when you're holding a boundary. Yeah. Like the hardest part of boundary work isn't actually the boundary itself. It's like holding it when these things come in that you just said, right? And boundaries aren't meant to be like strict lines in the sand that can never be moved. You know, let's say a sibling does come in and say, hey, I know this was decided, but we decided we wanted to go sledding, you know, Christmas afternoon, just putting it all out there. The beautiful part about boundaries is maybe what you and Nick had co-created before, maybe this actually sparks a different conversation because you're not the same person that you were in that same time.
Well, and I think there's room for, I really try to pre-plan everything. And so I try to be like, I don't want to be exhausted. And I typically get sick at Christmas. This is also my MO, is to get very ill. It's like landed me in the hospital a few times. And so I typically try to like set myself up to be like, I will not be exhausted. And so I think what you're speaking to is a good point, that sometimes you reevaluate and maybe you're going, hey, we're actually not as stressed as we thought we'd be at this time.
Fair.
We can have capacity for this. Yeah. I love what you've said about boundaries, almost like being re-examined or being able to like re-look at them. Because I think right now boundaries for a lot of people are like set in stone.
Oh yeah. So many conversations I have in my therapy space about like, but I made this boundary about Christmas. How can I go back? Is that going to look bad of my character or anything? And I'm like, no, actually, when you invite sort of those, questionings in, I think that really speaks to your relationship with yourself, your relationship to your partner, to your kids, to the people that are important to you. I think that speaks to, that's a real testament of how you hold these people of value, because you're willing to be like, hey, wait a minute, that version of myself that created that boundary a couple of weeks ago maybe isn't the same person. And that's okay. Yeah. I think we wake up different versions of ourselves every single day. Right. And so maybe a boundary that fit a couple of weeks ago because of the season maybe that we were in, it fit. And as, let's say, a message were to come through in the group chat and it's like, oh, this is actually poking something at me. This is actually, creating some discomfort. Maybe I need to reevaluate this. And knowing like it's really okay to change and adapt, or it's really okay to be like, yes, we're going to have Christmas by ourselves, and I'm going to feel like I'm going to miss out a little bit, and that's okay. And both. I think that's like a beautiful way to give ourselves some compassion.
Well, I feel like we almost skip over the emotion piece, right? We're like, I'm going to make this boundary decision. I feel good about it, right? And then when that circumstance comes up, we're like, I'm going to feel great and like amazing, And I think probably it's the grief piece often.
That's what it is.
Is what comes in, and probably other emotions too. But I'm imagining we've like made this decision, and then when it comes up, it's like, it still maybe might not always mean that you need to change your boundary, but there can be a sadness and a loss.
Certainly.
Or like a process of grief.
Certainly.
Sometimes that you need to walk through and be like, okay, this is the decision I still want to stick with, but I'm allowed to walk through sadness, anger, whatever. I forget the grief things.
All those pieces, right?
Right?
I think that you're speaking to exactly it, like, and in both. It can be both.
Hey there, it's CJ. Have you been looking for the perfect gift for your friend, sister, even yourself this holiday season? Look no further, because the Her Podcast swag is here to add some style and warmth to your winter wardrobe. If you have a fellow Her Podcast listener in your circle, our Her crew neck and Her hoodie are the perfect gift. But here's the catch, folks. We have a very limited quantity left. So why wait until the last minute for your Christmas shopping? Get ahead of the game and order one for a friend, or better yet, send your Christmas wish list to someone ASAP. These swag items are not just clothing, they're statements. They say, I'm her, meaning I'm a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, a friend, an entrepreneur. I'm brave, ambitious, capable, loving, confident, brilliant. I am her. Quantities are limited, and once they're gone, they're gone. So don't wait around. Head over to our website right now and secure your Her hoodie or crew neck before it's too late. Go to itsherpodcast.ca, itsherpodcast.ca to check out our amazing swag, and make sure you grab yours today. Thanks for being a part of our community.
So we can take that for what it is and reevaluate, or we can just be like, okay, this is just like a human. Remember I was saying like people are entitled to the reactions?
Yeah.
This is just a human reaction.
Right.
Because these people mean something to me.
Right.
Experiences mean something to me. And it is actually really important for me to slow down at Christmas, because usually I get sick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. I don't know if you have those kind, and maybe this isn't where you fall in your therapy rooms, but I'm very interested in the sickness that just inevitably comes with Christmas. Mm-hmm. And what kind of I don't know if you have any like tips or tools or suggestions for maybe you said specifically happens to a lot of moms, mm-hmm. that they can maybe be even like bring awareness to, as because we're in it now. It's like people are setting up their trees. I'm feeling the social pressures of like, oh my gosh, it's time to get like into this mood. I'm wondering if you can provide any, I don't like the word tips.
Yeah, I know, we need to come up with a new word.
It's
all
like
of us have.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like tips. Tips.
Step one.
Step one. And it's like more just like, and that's why I said like bring awareness. Like I'm like, how do we bring awareness to this season that's upon us already?
Well, I think that the season actually needs attention way before. Right? Because I think what happens is our nervous systems get into this survival mode. Get through the activities, get through the shopping, get through the gift thinking, and then the gift buying, and then the gift wrapping, and then the parties, and then everything else that we commit to. Just get through it. And what happens is our nervous system's in survival mode. So our nervous system's like, okay, well, let's just do it. Let's just get in there. And then all of a sudden, when the gift giving is, or when the gifts are done and the parties are done, and then the celebrating is left, our nervous system goes, oh, I can just sort of tail back here. I can dial down a bit. When our nervous system is high, the systems actually shut down. Like our immune system functioning, it shuts down as a way to resource our nervous system, the energies and what we need to do to just get through. And so when we slow down and dials down, our nervous system's like, okay, I can just take a bit of a sabbatical here. And then our immune system's like, well, I actually haven't been working this whole time. So here you go. have a cold, have a flu, have like a bedridden time at Christmas. It's all joyful.
I'm going to catch up now.
I'm just going to catch up, right?
I should just start putting a Christmas tree in my room so I can at least experience the holidays from my bed.
You're like, I'm just preparing.
I'm just
for the
preparing.
inevitable.
It's fine.
It's true, because that stress, our body isn't meant to be in that high state of stress for so long. But I think it lends itself to a larger discussion around the systems and the pressures and the expectations that are around women to make the holidays what they are, or moms to make the holidays what they are. So I think I always go bigger. Like if anybody's ever in my therapy space or we're having like a good conversation, it's never just the singling of an individual. We actually can invite some conversations around how this is like a larger system that is perpetuating these silent expectations again about what this needs to look like. And if you're a good mom, this is what Christmas needs to look like. And that stress plays into our body. We almost like embody that. And then when things slow down, of course our nervous system is going to dial down and our immune system is going to be like, well, I got nothing left. So good luck.
So how do you then suggest setting boundaries? I'm going to like this place. And I saw that quote that one year or last year, and it was like, growing up is realizing the holiday Christmas magic was really a mom who really cared.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. And so I'm curious on advice for moms who are sitting here looking. It's so hard because I love Christmas. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful, magical time of year personally. And I realize that comes because I'm in the state I'm in. That's not the case for everybody. But I'm like, how do we give ourselves boundaries within our own small core family units? Because we've talked about, okay, so I got to go to my parents. I'm going to be like, I'm not coming anymore. Or, sorry, grandma, I'm not coming to that. But now we're looking at, hey, so I did this, and this last year to make it really special. And this year, I can't do that. What does that look like?
Well, I think it's interesting because that line you said about moms who really care, I think that's the problem. If you care about your family, whether you have kids or not, this usually falls on women. If you care, this is what it looks like.
Yeah. Caring equals
this. And I think you've just landed exactly what the freaking problem is this like idea that caring equals this. But like caring can also be paring down. Caring can also be doing less. Caring can also be like, hey, co-creator in my house, spouse, I actually don't want to do all of this. Yeah. So we need to have a conversation of what this is going to look like, because oftentimes it's going to look like less because we're not doing this. But I think what you just said, like even that like got me like fired up. I'm like, this is the problem.
Yeah.
These messages about like behind a good Christmas is a mom who cares. That's bullshit.
There we go.
That's crap. And it sets up this expectation that if I care, if I want to be like, I owe the world being a good mom and a good woman, this is what it measures out to. And if I don't do that, well, I'm letting people down. I'm not going to be looked at. I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to be disappointing somebody else. I'm not maybe as good as I thought I was.
Well, and then
womp, womp.
we're also inundated with not only comparing ourselves, but it's like what I just said, like I see people setting up their Christmas stuff, and Nick and I have a boundary in our home where we typically don't set up until after the 12th.
Yeah.
I have to set up this year because I got hired to do content, which I'm like slightly struggling with because I'm like, no, I don't typically do this. But I think like also not only are we comparing ourselves, am I a good mom to the mom I was last year? Now with social media, we're looking at what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And how do we protect ourselves around the holidays with social media?
Well, and I'm like, no shade. Like, I'm not trying to throw shade, but I'm like, there's this wave of like, you go from like one holiday to the next, right? So it's like Halloween, right? Like everyone's going all out for Halloween, and you're just seeing all this stuff that you should be doing or making you think I'm not doing that at home. And then literally, like I remember the day after Halloween, it was just like the onslaught of Christmas content. And I was just like, you want to be like, oh, that's so beautiful. And I was like, there wasn't even a moment to breathe, like with inside of the social sphere, you know what I mean? And obviously I can recognize it's like accounts that I've chosen to follow, right? So there's a piece of me maybe in here, and it's like, who am I choosing to follow, right? And I'm not against Christmas content or like Halloween content, but I just think this perpetuating of this narrative is like, yeah, it's hard, right? In this social space that it's just like, it jumps so quickly.
It's like on to the next, on to the next.
Yeah.
Or you walk into Costco, right? And it's like the next thing is, you know, and you're just like, you're always thinking forward.
Yeah, personally, Costco Christmas aisle gives me a hit of dopamine, so I'm into it.
No,
when
that's
I'm
okay.
feeling a little low,
Sounds like a
but
good
I
boundary
walk
to me.
down that aisle and I'm just like, dee, 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 dee.
Well, I think what you're even suggesting, so we were just saying, like, I was in Vancouver for some training right before Halloween, and I am not the mom with the decorated house.
No.
I don't give a crap. I love Halloween. I love the joy it brings kids. I don't decorate. I didn't even plan to get my kid a Halloween costume. My husband just did it because he knows. He just did it. And he also just bought the pumpkins. This is where I am. Right. And it was Halloween morning or afternoon before we were going out, and we were carving pumpkins. And I remember thinking to myself, Ash, when I was away, I'm like, oh, I didn't even get the pumpkins. He didn't do this. I'm like, wait a minute. This does not define me. Like, he's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Did we find time to do it right before we went trick-or-treating? Yeah, we did. And for us, that worked. And again, that's not throwing shade to anybody that wants to decorate or bring that in. But for me, those values and boundaries are different. And it's easy, I think, to get sucked into what you're seeing, what you're being sort of, what you're seeing, I guess, would be the best way to think about that. And I guess it just comes back to, it's okay to see this stuff. It's okay that people are decorating and loving the holiday and doing the Halloween stuff, but it doesn't need to like penetrate you. And I think for me, because boundaries are just obviously a part of my life, and I'm not an expert at it, and nor am I an expert even in my own life, but I always try to work alongside boundaries, is I'm very okay with where I'm at with how that lands with being a mom.
Okay, so when you get a prick, right? So I'm seeing all this social content and I'm getting a little prick, you know, and like obviously I'm wanting to go internal because it has nothing to do with these people. Actually, it has to go with myself, right? What are ways that I can walk through and be like, why am I triggered? What can I do about this? What does this mean for me? You know, like what are some of those pieces?
The very first thing is just like, take a break. Invite the pause in. There you go. We just breathe. Oftentimes, like, I didn't do this, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do this. And then, like, when we're not breathing, and all of our nervous system's like, oh my gosh, we're in threat and we're in danger. What's happening? And then we're like Amazoning stuff to the house, and we're like thinking, you know, like racking up the credit card, right? And it's like, what are we doing? So, like, when we're being almost pricked, when we're like, you know, it's like we feel that jolt, that hit. I just invite people just to just take a breath, put down your phone, exit the space. Go to the bathroom if you need to and splash some really cold water on your face. Have a cold shower. Go outside. Get a hit of, you know, cool, crisp air if that's where you're at. And just take a minute and just like force the breath from here down here and just exhale. Just exhale. Because what that does is this brings this brain back online and we're like, okay, right. This makes sense that I would be feeling this way. And it doesn't mean that I love my family any less. It doesn't mean that I love my partner any less or the people around me. It's really okay for people to have space to share what they're doing. And it's okay for me to sit in if it's different. Again, it goes back to everybody's entitled to their reaction, like human reaction to things. I don't got to make it mine if I don't want to.
Yeah.
But it comes with the pause and the space, I think, is the biggest thing. If people are sort of thinking, well, what do I do in this? Put your damn phone down, put your tablet down, give yourself just some time just to pause. And it is amazing what happens in the pause.
Yeah, I think your whole body probably catches up with you, right?
Yeah.
Because you were just like running full steam ahead, you know, without even thinking. And then all of a sudden you can be like...
the comparison game comes, the envy game comes, right? You know, Dr. Jody Carrington talked about that at the retreat we were at in September, right? So I think it's to offset some of the impact that can have is just like inviting the pause and using breath. It sounds so funny and so cliche as a therapist to say that, but it's so important. We hold everything in.
Yeah.
Well, then probably I'm imagining from a calm state, we can then sort of evaluate and be like, okay, do I need to put up Christmas stuff? Do I need to do this? Right. And actually think like, what are my values?
Yeah. What do I got going on here?
Yeah. What are questions that you can ask to sort of, you know, I feel like we've talked about values quite a bit, and I'm like, obviously there's like probably like life values, like holiday values, like relational value, you know, like all these different types, you know what I mean? So I'm curious what sort of even values means, if that makes sense to you, and how we can express that, how someone would walk through figuring out what their values are and identifying them.
I think our emotions are really tied to what we value. So anytime that we have a reaction with anything, whether it's on the spectrum of emotion, and I don't speak in like positive emotion, but negative emotion, we speak in a range of emotions. So whenever we have like an emotional reaction to something, that tells you what you value, right? That tells you something about yourself, about your system, your environment, where you're at. And so I would really encourage people. I think this is sort of unsung in our world, is like emotions can tell us, like our feelings can tell a lot. Right. So if we even think the example that comes to my head is like some of the most powerful social justice movements of our time have been fueled by rage and anger. And we needed that because what happens when that gets built up, it's like, wait a minute, what's happening here? Why is this, moving me in this way? Oh, because I really care about this, or
It's
I really
catalyst.
care about this. Right. And so if we can get in tune with emotion, which is not easy.
Yeah.
Right. It requires some embodiment. It requires going back into the body. And for certain folks, I think it's easier. Like we have different resources based on the systems that we've lived in, the things that we've seen, the things we haven't seen, the things we've heard, the things we didn't hear, right? It impacts sort of our relationship with that. But for anybody thinking about, well, I don't even know really what I value, think about how you're reacting to things. And that can give you sort of a gateway of like, oh, well, that might be important to me, right? So an example might be in a therapy space, we often go about this in kind of in a different way. And somebody might be like, yeah, I'm looking at like social media, for instance, and it's like, oh, I just see these communities and I see like the happiness or this, and it's like, oh, so for me, I'm like, oh, is that something that, you'd like, tell me more about community, tell me more about connection. They're like, yeah, I feel this and this and this and this. I'm like, oh, so you actually value the status of community or the access to people. And they kind of look at you and like, oh, maybe I do. Maybe I do. And then,
Light bulb.
You're right. And then it moves into that like, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, how can we invite that more in? So emotions and feelings can just tell us a lot about who we are.
Ooh, that's
and what we value,
good.
Right? And the secondary to that is, what do we want this time to feel like? Like, what do we want the holidays to feel like? For us, we want to feel connected to our parents. And we have a different experience because my husband lost his dad when he was in his early 30s. So his experience is so different.
Yeah.
Right? And young, tragic death has always circled around me. I've never been shy about that. So grief has taught me lots of different lessons for me. And so that has formulated why we value this. And we've never spent Christmas at home. Whereas for the next people next door to us, their experiences could be different. So it's like, what do we want this to feel like? What do we want this experience to feel like? What do we intend by this experience? That's therapy speak. But you can just think about like, what do we want this to feel like? Like, what do we want to get out of this?
Yep. On the last time you were here, you talked about quiet and loud boundaries. And I know that's going to play a big role into how people approach the holidays. So number one, I do want you to reiterate a little bit about the quiet and loud boundaries. And then I want to get into a little bit on how I feel like we've moved through all these steps. We're like, okay, the step one is like, what do we want it to look like? Step two is like, okay, with our co-creator, we're going to like figure out where we want to spend Christmas. Now I'm interested into going into the next level of like, okay, so you've decided to spend Christmas with your entire family, but there's someone there who you need to have boundaries with specifically. It's not even anymore the boundary of, do I go? It's like, I want to go, but I know this person, I need to have set boundaries with. And I'm curious if you can kind of tie in the quiet and loud boundaries and then also tips on how to go about maybe some of those.
Just saw your face there.
I know. Hey, it's so oversaid. But how someone can go about having those conversations before, after, during, what does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is remembering that boundaries are about guiding our own behavior. They are not about rules or requests or guiding the behaviors of other people, right? And so sometimes if we're new to boundaries or we're kind of like, experimenting with boundaries for the first time, sometimes rules and requests, depending on who it's with, can be helpful. But for the most part, boundaries really are about coming back to and guiding our own behavior. So if we've made the decision that we are going to go and attend this holiday festivity and there's a certain family member there that, again, pokes at us, kicks something up for us, we're going to have to do the internal work to say, well, I am choosing to be here. I'm actually choosing to be here. So in that, there's going to be probably more quiet boundaries around, I'm going to have to maybe have some more distance, like space from this
Physical
individual.
space.
Physical space.
I'm going to sit at this end of the table while they sit at that end of the table. Yes,
I might have to, excuse myself to the bathroom more often to just go take a pause and a break, or cold water is great to sort of help move things through. It's like, maybe I need to do that more often. Reminding ourselves that if we're in that space, we're choosing that. So likely there's going to be things in there I'm going to see and witness. And I have to decide, what do I want to just sit with? And what am I okay with? This is going back to that first episode, is like literally, what am I okay with? What am I not okay with? And so having that conversation, we can't expect ourselves to show up the way we want to if we actually haven't had that preliminary conversation with ourselves about, it's hard to hold ourselves accountable for a boundary if we don't even know what the hell the boundary actually is. So we got to really figure out, so with this particular person or the set of individuals, like, what is okay for me and what is not okay for me. And as you're looking down at the list, you might be like, oh shit, like there's a lot of things I'm not okay with. Does it make sense for me to continue to be there? And so that can engage some different conversations. Or as we look at the list, it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe there wasn't as many things I'm not okay with. I can actually lean into that. That actually feels a little bit better, a little bit maybe safer for me to go.
Okay, business owners, entrepreneurs, and anyone else who feels like they might need help getting clarity in their business or in life, listen up. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 7 years, and I can say without a doubt, one of the best investments I've made for my business and for myself was to get a coach. I can't even begin to explain how much of a positive impact it's been to have someone in my corner cheering me on and challenging me all at the same time. Whether it's making decisions about what move I should make next or aligning my goals with my effort, having someone to keep me accountable has been a game changer. Now, there's definitely a coach for everyone, and if you're sitting here thinking, yeah, Erica, that sounds great, I could really use a kick in the butt, then this next part is for you. It's time for you to meet Heather Kehoe, Boundaries Over Burnout coach and founder of the Hustle Culture Hater Club. If you're looking to dip your toes into the world of business and personal growth coaching, then I want to encourage you to check out Heather's 4-week reset coaching program. Even though it's only 4 weeks, you'll be impressed by the amount of clarity and confidence you'll gain in such a short time. Professional and personal growth starts with knowing exactly what you want, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. Basically a roadmap. That is what true clarity is. If you're ready to focus and receive support, then Heather's 4-week reset program will be right up your alley. This program includes one 60-minute Zoom call with Heather each week for 4 weeks, and we have an exclusive discount code for you. You can use the code HER100 to get $100 off your 4-week coaching program with Heather. Simply mention this code when booking in with her. If you want to connect with Heather about her coaching offerings, make sure to follow her on Instagram at the Hustle Culture Hater Club, or visit her website at thehchc.com. Make sure to use the code HER100 to save $100 off Heather's 4-week reset program.
What are some common examples of things that people bring up that they're struggling with when they go to, let's say, gatherings?
Politics is huge. Like the world climate right now. Lots of conversations around body shaming, around food shaming in all of its devices and all of its ways. Parenting, like lots of opinions and thoughts about parenting, particularly around the holiday time. I've worked with a number of parents around, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about Santa here. Make sure your kids aren't listening. A number of parents are like, we don't want to we're going to have Santa more as a character, not as a real being. And that might go against some of the ways that our other family members have done things, right? So there could be some pieces there. I think that would be probably the top ones. Yeah. The parenting, body, food shaming, when politics come in, those pieces can kind of...
Well, and I know that you've talked about before in some of your content, the importance around even boundaries for you and your kids, either being a new mom or what boundaries look like for your kids and physical touch.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if you could speak to some of that.
Yeah. I think again, it goes back to having conversations, if you have a partner, like a co-creator, especially with physical touch around consent, and like body consent, I think it's imperative, particularly, let's say if you're at their family, right? We want to make sure. And so, for my own reasons, my husband and I have always had very active conversations around body consent with our little one. And so, we have said from the beginning that I said to him, this is the way things are going to be. And because I'm not okay with the rest. And so having, I think, that support is really important. If you have the ability to have a co-creator, if not, that support is going to be like you and yourself, like you're going to be in relationship with yourself. And so it can still be really lovely, right? I think there was one post I put up and had some really interesting conversations. It's like, hey, we actually don't force hugs. But what do you want to give Auntie so-and-so or Grandma? Do you want to give her a high five, a fist pump? And one of the conversations I was having, and it was like, Grandma didn't even know what a fist pump was. And so it was like a really beautiful, little connected thing where Grandma still felt like, she was getting something out of it, and little person was able to have their body autonomy over, like, I actually don't want to hug and kiss. I just like, hey, I'm going to give Grandma a fist pump. Like, it was a really interesting moment, right? It doesn't have to be like, no, we do not do that, right? It's like, actually, what we do here is like, we don't force hugs or kisses. And so what do you want to give Grandma? What feels good right now? Auntie, whatever that looks like, right? Yeah.
When you talk about quiet and loud boundaries, obviously, I mean, quiet boundaries are quiet. You don't say them. They're just like internal within yourself. Yeah. I'm very interested in how to approach conversations. So I was thinking about this whole, when you said, like the discussions that most people have problems with in the holidays, like politics, body shaming, parenting. So you set a loud boundary. Let's just go to the loud boundaries. And you say, hey, like, I'm actually not interested in speaking about politics. It's just not something I want to do. And you get that person from across the table who kind of pushes. And finally you say, you know what, my boundary was actually, I'm going to leave if this continues. But then you have the inundated from everyone else going, no, don't go. Like, what does that look like for someone?
I think the number one thing is to remember with the people saying, no, don't go. It's probably coming from a place of love. They're loving you through this. So here's and in both again. So it's like, it's really okay for them to have that reaction, and it's okay for you to do what you need to protect your space, right? So, let's say that you've done the internal talk is like, yeah, so-and-so usually brings up this, or like there's racist comments or, very discriminatory language that is used. And it's just like, it's just not okay, but we're going to give it a try because I love this family, this as a whole. And then all of a sudden things start happening. And, there might be a point where like, okay, well, this is my quiet boundary. Yes, I knew that. But now I'm leaning into like, hey, like that conversation actually, can we just not have it at the dinner table? Like let's just table that. Let's just put that away. Can we softly redirect? Sometimes that works for people. And for some people, it's like, hey, this person actually isn't safe. I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to just like remove myself, go start doing the dishes, go into the basement, or take the kids outside, or, whatever that might look like. And so having that assessment is really important too, because loud boundaries only work for people that are able to be called in. And we can't decide that. Like we can't force people in. We can only invite them. It's up to them. Right. So sometimes it might not be safe to do that. But other times we're like, hey, like this conversation, I don't know about anybody else, but it's feeling weird. Can we just like divert? Can we just not talk about this? Or like, that's not okay. That's what I've used at our table. Like, that's actually not okay.
When you just used the language called in.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
I was going to be like, go about, what's the difference between called in and called out? Because I feel like that is how some people are approaching their boundaries, is they're calling out individuals.
I didn't even know that I said that, but this is how much I talk about it. I think called out creates disconnection. I don't think it invites conversations that are compassion and grace-filled for change. I think everybody can change. I think everybody has the capacity, to be able to do that, or be able to bring in a different perspective. But when we're called out, I think even just saying it, like your body just like, you know what I mean?
When
like
you
it's
call
like
someone out, it's actually a very offensive. I'm not like not offensive.
Yeah, like and you're on the
like
offense.
If I was in sports, I'd say on the offense, right? Like it's actually very attacking. I feel when you're like, I'm going to call them out. reverse to like, I'm going to call them in.
Yeah. And so this goes back to a lot of the work I've done, like anti-racist, anti-oppressive work, through the lens of the work that I do. I'm a social worker by trade, so it's very important for me to continue doing a lot of that unlearning. And so through that process, I learned that like calling in actually can be kind of an interesting measure of inviting in a connection, inviting in a conversation. And so a lot of us have parents that were raised in different times, that were raised by parents that were raised by parents in wartime, so that it just very different can lend itself to different conversations. And so what I've leaned into, what I encourage people to think about is like calling in invites connection. Calling in, be like, hey, I just have a thought about that. Like, hey, that's actually not okay. What do you mean that's not okay? Well, this is what it makes me think, or this is what's actually happening. Like going back to the body consent, it's like, actually, we don't do that. We want to learn. We want to have our kid be able to tell us like what's okay and what's not okay with their body. Oh, that's a thing. I've literally had that happen in my life. Oh, really? Like they're allowed to, like, yeah, little kids are allowed to have body consent starting very little.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, called in, I think it's just like a beautiful way to build connection, but we're not responsible whether people actually come in or not. I think that's also something we need to talk about. Like, we don't need to like drag them in. We can call them in. We can lead with compassion and grace, but whether they come in is actually not up to us.
Well, it makes me feel like, see an image of like almost like opening the door and being like, would you like to come in?
Yeah.
Right. And they also have a choice of being like, no, I would not like to step in. Right. But it's like an invitation.
Yes.
Right. To like be like, hey, you're welcome in this direction.
Yeah. And I think that's all boundary work. Like that's all what it is. Right. I can't remember what we were initially calling, but anyways, that's the difference. But for me, calling in, I think, is just a really good measure. And sometimes I think it also invites curiosity into the space of like, well, tell me more about this body consent. This sounds so progressive, right? Like I've had clients who have talked about family, have been like that. Well, let's break that down. Okay. If you actually want to know, this is where we're coming from. Why are you teaching your kids, proper body autonomy or proper body names? Well, this is why. And we can like call people in, and that's where learning happens. That's where learning happens. I think. I'm very passionate about this part.
You get excited about learning. Yeah, tell me.
Do you think there's anything to be said about like, once you set a boundary, like, okay, so you said before, like a boundary can change. We can re-examine our boundaries. But I'm really thinking about in the moment when we start to feel like, what's the word I was going to use? Compromising on our boundaries, and how you can try to set yourself up so that you don't compromise on your boundaries. I don't know. So the first question that comes to mind is, when we think about compromising, if anybody, for the listeners, for everybody here, is what is the compromising wanting to compromise? That's the question I go to. Okay.
So I think about the compromise being a thing.
Okay.
And I go like, what does the compromise actually want to compromise? Why does it want to compromise? And sometimes that'll come in and posing a question in that way. I think it opens the door for things like people pleasing, fear of disappointment, fear of rejection, fear of creating big emotions like disappointment or anger or frustration in other people. And so when we think about that compromising, the very first thing is like, why is the compromising wanting to compromise? What's actually going on here? And I think that lends itself to like,
can you give an example?
So what is the compromising wanting to compromise? Why is it wanting to compromise? Because the discomfort that something creates in me when I say no is not enough. Like I can't take that from how other people are taking. Like the discomfort in me that my no is creating for other people is not something that I can do. So that oftentimes people pleasing will be in our ear, right? And be like, don't do that. They're not going to like that. If they don't like you, who are you? What is your worth? If your mom says that about you, or your dad or family, like, what do you think who are you? Who do you think you are? Your value is in how much you say yes to other people. That's what the people pleasing voice oftentimes will say. And so when we think about why is the compromising? I think it's such a, like, I always say to people when they're in my therapy space, I ask very different questions. So just roll with me. No, but I think it opens up conversation about like, okay, what is actually the intention of the compromise? Oh, it's because of the discomfort that my no creates in me is too much. There we go. There's some pathways that we can work in. We can actually talk about that. We can unpack that.
How does someone who has compromised on their boundary and has, you know, they're going and they're like so excited, and again, we're thinking about the holidays and they're like all jacked up and they're like, I have my boundary, I'm going to invite people in. This is not a wall, this is a bridge. Like, I'm ready to go. They're like, they listen to this podcast, they listen to the first podcast. They're like, like, this is going to be a great holiday season, you know, co-creator, family's on board. And then you walk in and you just lose your boundary. The after effects. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure you talk with people who are like, I'm ready. Mm-hmm. It's like, I can equate it to being like fully prepped for a test and going in and bombing. Yeah. And you're like, well, that didn't go the way I thought. How does someone then walk through? Because I feel like what could happen is someone going, well, I don't know how to set boundaries. I suck at sound. There's no point in me doing all this work. There's, you know, why would I try that again when I just fail at it? I'm curious how we can like bring someone back and encourage them, or like what you would say to them maybe when they're sitting there being like, Ashley, I suck.
I always have a pen in front of me, and what I would probably literally what I'm envisioning, I'd be like, okay, so check mark, you're human. Yeah, you're human. Things didn't go as planned, so you're human. Okay, perfect. We got that figured out. It's progress over perfection. We live in a society that demands perfection at any decision, at any intersection of decision. So if we decide, hey, I'm not going to allow so-and-so to body shame me at the table anymore. And then we do all the work and we show up there. It's like, oh no, I can't say anything. I'm scared. Guess what? You're human. It's really okay. For me as a therapist, coming from the way that I do my work, which is different, I see that there is sure, failure is a word we could use, but they got to that point. Like, they got to the door with their boundaries. Like, their boundaries were handed, like, that says something.
They showed up for themselves.
Yeah, like, they even thought about it. They even turned on this podcast and listened to it. They invited it. Ashley was talking about with my co-creator. What the hell does that mean? So I'm gonna unpack that with my partner. And all of a sudden, it's like, that still is progression. We're not going for perfection. And guess what? There's gonna be another Christmas. There's gonna be another holiday. Right? Yeah. So, like, check your humanity. Yep, you're human. This is not about being perfect. If it feels safe for you, if it feels like you want to go back in, I think you nailed it. It's like, well, this didn't go the way that I wanted. Okay, what did? What did go okay? What do I want to think about doing differently? I don't say better. Guys, I don't know if I talked about this the last time. I don't say better, because we're also in this world that, like, everything has to be better. Yeah. I'm like,
better, bigger.
And it's like, I think what it does is like, I'm going on a tangent here. It like reinforces this idea of like, we're never good enough. So if we're always striving to be better with all the messages, the systems around us, just be better. It's like, no, different. What do I need to do differently next time? If this outcome isn't something that I'm okay with. Yeah. That's boundary work. Yeah. That's like the raw sense. That's you and yourself having these conversations.
Yeah. Do you think for some people it's key to invite their co-creator into a boundary like this? Like, I'm thinking, right, like, again, we go to the conversations around the table. Do you think there's room for that? Or would you say boundary work is more just about you personally?
I think it can be and in both.
Are we surprised? Stop asking questions because she keeps being like, and in both.
I think boundaries love having support from people too. I think boundaries really thrive in that. And you can be your own supporter. That's not even to say that has to be a physical being, right? But if you have the privilege of having other folks around you that say, hey, you know what, when so-and-so body shames you, we've really talked about how that really, does something up with you. Would it be okay if I said something? What? You're going to say something? What would you say? I don't know, but is it okay if I say something? Right? Like, I think that not only reinforces the connection between your co-creator, whether that's a partner, a sister, like a sibling or a friend or whoever else in the gathering, but having that like ally around of like, maybe it doesn't always just have to be me about particularly the body shaming, the food shaming that happens around, the holiday season, right? If we can have that, I think that's a beautiful connection piece to feel supported in that.
I totally agree. You talk about obviously people pleasing, and I don't think this is the right word, but you almost basically, it's not personified because we're not making it a thing. like, how do we remove it from ourselves and make it a thing, right? And not have it internally. So I'd love for you to explain like what that is. But I also think when it comes to around the holidays specifically, like people pleasing for a lot of us is at an all-time high, right? And what are the pieces that we need to start walking through to start identifying like why are we doing that and how to unpack it?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny that whenever people call me in to like the ways that I'm doing my therapy, I'm like, oh, I'm doing it right. This is so fun. And what I mean by right is a way that feels really good for me. And so, yeah, I don't believe that people are ever the problem. I think the problems are the problems. And so we work really hard in my space to be able to create that space. And so, yes, I talk about people pleasing as being a thing. And again, what is the people pleasing? Why is the people pleasing? Those are questions that are so powerful. And so, oh God, I totally forgot your question, but I was just excited that you're like, yeah, externalize. That's therapy speak. People, please don't use that word with your people if that doesn't feel right, because we don't need another viral video going through all the people again. But it's understanding that something like people pleasing knows you very intimately. It knows the ins and outs. It knows your story. It knows your history. So it knows how to be tricky. It knows how to pull you in to people please, to please the people pleasing. And so even just understanding that like, hey, if this isn't me and this is the people pleasing, and I always put my hand up here in my space. It's like, if this is the people pleasing, okay, if this isn't actually inviting me to think about, this isn't me, this is the people pleasing. There's power in that. There's reminding like, hey, I have power here. If the people pleasing is trying to convince me that my worth is in how much I say yes to other people and how much I say no to myself. And if I'm even thinking that in this time, in this space, that might tell me that I actually have a better relationship with myself than I think I do. Or I believe that somewhere I'm worthy. Like even down deep, that if I'm contemplating this, that tells me as a therapist in the way that I do my work, that there is worth. There is there, because they never would be contemplating that. They never would be inviting these questions in if they didn't believe that somewhere that they were worthy of being like, wait a minute, I actually want to say yes to myself. I actually really want to start saying no. So knowing that people pleasing in particular around the holidays permeates all of the social media, all of the commercials, all of the things that we see, all of the messaging, right? It like uses that as a way to recruit people in, particularly women, to do its bidding.
That's wild to think of it. And yeah, that's just wild to a good shift in the mindset to think about the fact that it's this external thing. Because I think a lot of people walk around and say, I'm a people pleaser. And then
you assume the labels then.
Yes.
Because if I'm a people pleaser, that means this and that means this. Well, like, but says who?
Yeah.
And people are like, well, huh? Oh, wait, I want to define what that looks like. I don't want to be in that relationship like that anymore.
Yeah. No, this was so good, Ashley. We already said it, but this time of year I think is really heavy for a lot of people for so many different reasons. And for some people, their boundary might be like, I don't celebrate Christmas, right?
Fair.
I don't want to be taking part in this. So whether you are, I know we talked a lot about like actively participating in Christmas, but if you're someone sitting there going, I don't want to actively participate in Christmas or the holidays to be specific, I really think that hopefully you will find value in this. I know I did. I'm going to take some of these things that you've given me today, and I'm going to definitely implement them into my game plan for the holidays. I know you know that we have a question that we love to ask at the end.
Yes.
Which is, what is your favorite piece of advice that you like to give or that you've been given in your life?
Oh, boundaries are not hard for you because there is something inherently wrong. Boundaries are hard for us because of what's happened to us. And that always makes me like really emotional when I say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why does it make you emotional?
Because again, I think we're so prone to blame ourselves for everything that it's just me. It's just me. Right. But when we really look at it, boundaries have nothing to do with our inherent like imperfections. It actually has everything to do with the things that we've gone through.
Yeah.
Things that have happened to us, things that we've seen, things that we got, things that we didn't get.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
I think a lot of our listeners that have been here from the beginning know where to find you, but I want to give you the opportunity because you obviously have a space, a counseling space that's available to residents in Saskatchewan, correct?
That's right.
But give us your handles, your website, your business, all of the things that you would like to share.
Wonderful. Yeah. So if you're on the gram, I'm Ashley, the Boundary Therapist on the Instagram. Yes, I do have a private practice space in Saskatoon. And so our website is brelandcounseling.ca. And I am very lucky to have a team of, there's 4 social workers now. That's the difference between the last time that I was in. So I have a really lovely team that practices in the same lenses that you would have heard me speak in today. So we're very fortunate to be able to support the community of Saskatchewan in that way.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We'll link everything in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we love having you, Ashley. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me
Thank you
back.
for sharing. Of course. Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.